Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Alonzo Bodden, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Jazz Cruise, on behalf of Jazz Live in Las Vegas. I am here to introduce this man. I can't tell you everything he's done, so I'm going to read this intro from his bio. The multiple roles in which he excels: composer, arranger, conductor, producer, educator, and of course, extraordinary bassist. Ladies and gentlemen, John Clayton.
Did I do all that stuff?
According to your bio, you have done it all. I don't know. I'm going to take your word for it.
Oh, Alonzo, how are you, man?
I'm good, John. I'm good. How are you doing with the quarantine, the shutdown, not touring, not working, and everything else?
It's a challenge. I mean, you spend your whole life. Like most musicians, I can't think of a period in my life when I didn't play with other musicians for months. And when for the good part of a year, whatever it is, 8-9 months, no gigs were on the books. That's kind of different. But, it's sort of, again, like most people, most artists, it forces you, in order to be creative and stay busy, to get creative in another way. So hence these kinds of meetings and Zoom lessons, workshops online, living room concerts, all those things that people are doing to kind of stay in the game.
I was going to ask you about that because, being a comic, it's very easy for me. Well, again, I'd love to do it live, but it's easy for me to do this because my job is just me talking. Whereas you work with orchestras. So the idea, and I've talked to a couple of musicians, and they say, although technology is great, it's still difficult to connect with other musicians when you're each in your own studio or in your own space. Have you done that and collaborated with others, played with other musicians, and what's that like?
Last week I actually experimented with a couple of bass player friends of mine. One's a techie guy, and we're checking out the software that kind of limits the latency problem. So because of distance and speed of light, you're always dealing with that. When I would play a note, and normally somebody else in the band would play that note exactly with me, because we're in different places and the speed of light, they're trying to find software that will bring that closer and limit that so that you can get as close as possible to lining that up. I think they've got it as close as they're going to get within a 500-mile radius. So, I mean, you're probably 30 miles from me or something like that. Ostensibly, we could play together, and it would be fine.
Actually, it wouldn't, John. If you and I played together right now, one of us would sound phenomenal, but even he would not sound so good as to carry the other.
Okay, you know what? Not to go off point, but here's a loaded question for you. If you now think carefully about the answer before you answer, because there's either the answer bass or maybe something honest. But think about it. If you could play an instrument, what instrument would you play? What would you choose?
That is a great question. And when I was a kid, when I was in junior high school, when we had music class, I tried saxophone for one semester. And I don't have that that inner thing that musicians have, and also that willingness to work, to practice, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
But getting to know you guys, right? Because here was the thing, and I don't know if this happened with you, but because I was tall, right away they put me in string class and gave me the bass, and and I was like, I don't want to play this because I didn't want to carry it back and forth home to practice, right? But
nobody told you that you get all the girls.
Well, no, Marcus told me that. Marcus Miller told me that far too late. But honestly, having listened to like my taste in music, listening to Marcus, listening to Stanley, and listening to you, and because the acoustic has a beautiful sound, I would love to play the bass because you guys showed, and this is an interesting thing. Talk to me about this. The bass leading the band, leading the orchestra, as opposed to always being that instrument in the back, keeping time with the simple bass line. You guys expanded beyond that to make the bass the featured instrument. So what's that like? Talk to us a little about that. You made me want to be a bass player. So talk to me.
I don't want to change your mind. But the band leading thing, and I'm happy to see so many of my brothers and sisters in bass that are taking more of a lead role. You're right. Pretty much most music starts from the bass. Why? Because if you're thinking about chords and you're thinking about melodies and everything, that it's all stacked on top of the bass sounds. If you don't have that bass sound along with the groove that the bass plays, so the drummer can play groove and needs to play groove and really fire everything up. The bass player needs to be a part of that, as well as all of the harmonic, the note stuff that goes on, So that kind of puts bass players, I think, in a really good position to have to straddle the fence and understand both sides. Plus, more and more bass players are now adding that melodic part to their being. So you got the groove, you got the bass part, and we're playing melodies now more and more and more and more. So there you are. And if you play in a big band, for instance, when I was with Count Basie's band, I was able to, after I memorized the book kind of in a short amount of time because I was forced to, because I left it backstage instead of having it ready. So I was like, uh-oh. But anyway, but when you can hear that music like I did in Basie's band, then you're able to not only understand the drums and the bass and all that stuff, but you're hearing all these horns play. And I think it's number one, it's desire. If you are into it, if you're excited about that sound, next thing you know, you're trying to create opportunities for that to happen.
Well, I want to talk to you about that, especially in talking about Count Basie's orchestra, but I want to back up. I want to, we had talked to our viewers and listeners. We had a little pre-meeting and we talked about this because John's career is so big. We were like, what can we talk about? Because the interview would go everywhere. So we decided we're going to talk about mentoring, right? We're going to talk about your mentors, the people you've mentored. So in reading your bio, going back to 1969, you were 16, yet you were studying at UCLA, a university. How does that work? And how did that influence you? Because I'm guessing you were playing with people who were ahead of you, older than you, more advanced, et cetera.
Oh, well, the way that happened is at 16 years old, I just started my classical lessons. My band director in high school said, okay, I can see that you're really into this. We need to get you a teacher. So he got me a classical teacher. I started taking classical lessons. And then one of my schoolmates said, I just heard a record. You got to check this record out. And we went to I'm from Venice, California. Went to Venice High School. I walked from Venice High School to my home, which is 6 doors down from the Venice Library. Go to the library, get this record, listen to it. It's Oscar Peterson with Ray Brown on bass, Ed Thigpen on drums. And they played Billy Boy And so you hear Oscar Peterson play this intro, and Ray Brown goes, I lost my mind. I had never heard the bass played like that in my life. So my next classical lesson, I walked up to, I said to the teacher, have you ever heard of this guy named Ray Brown? He said, oh yeah, he's a friend of mine. And he took out a letter from Ray Brown that said, dear Mr. Brown, would you please, I'm sorry, it said, dear Mr. Siegel, would you please tell your students about a class I'm teaching at UCLA called Workshop in Jazz Bass? That was my last classical lesson with that guy. I saved $65. And since it was an extension course, it met in the evening and every other week. And I could, even though I was in high school, I could take so I saved $65, enrolled in the course, and with a bunch of other bass players, I took that course. That began my relationship with Ray Brown. And after the course ended, he insisted that I take up classical lessons again. And I was also playing electric bass at the time. And he got me lessons with Carol Kay, great electric bass player. So that's how it started. So from then on, Ray Brown was my guy. He was the man who did all these things for me. I mean, he paid for my way into the Musicians Union. Like I said, he helped me get lessons again. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, with a single parent, so my mom was raising us, and we didn't have money, and I couldn't really. So Carol Kay gave me electric bass lessons for $5 a lesson. I mean, that was just so big of it. So that kind of thing. So the mentor, Ray Brown, let me follow him around to different studios, and that's where I first saw Quincy Jones and Jerome Richardson and Snooky Young and Sweets Edison and Bill Cosby and all these people. So it was Ray Brown. He was on and till the day he died, he was my mentor. You must have people like that in your life. I'm just curious, who are some of your mentors and models?
There's been a few. I'd have to say to compare to that, because comedy isn't something you do to go in a class and you practice. But my first job in stand-up, I was a doorman at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood, right? I went down, I did the 3-minute open mic, and the owner said, listen, I need a doorman. You could do the door, and we'll give you, when comics don't show up, you can get on stage. So I was there every night hoping that, people's cars would break down and crash and they wouldn't make it. In those days, George Wallace used to come to the Laugh Factory all the time. Dom Herrera used to come to the Laugh Factory all the time. They were my mentors, whether they knew it or not, because I would just watch them. George is the one who I became friends with, and I love being friends with him to this day. And I learned things from him. I used to tell George some of his jokes that he forgot, that because I listened to him so closely back then. So I would say those two were big, big mentors on a personal level. Also, Tommy Davidson. I spent a year traveling and opening for Tommy. I learned a lot from him. George Carlin, I love doing social commentary. You see my act. He's the best. He's the guy, I think the greatest social commentator we've ever had. Like I joke that if George Carlin was alive today, this would kill him. Right? Everything going on in our society, him trying to keep up with the insanity we're living in right now. But those are the guys, I really learned from. I want to jump ahead with you. So you went to university and you studied bass. You came out of university and you joined the Monty Alexander Trio, probably the greatest Afro band ever seen. Okay, I think we have a picture of this. The hair was absolutely fantastic. Come on, look at those afros. Are you kidding me? And I know, John, those are unassisted afros. There's no gel or anything else. There's no afro sheen or spray. Those are naturals going on there.
Yeah, those some naturals, all right. I must say that they were naturals with a little bit of help, because back then, if you wanted your fro to really get bigger, then you wouldn't just pick it, but you'd hit it with a blow dryer. And you know, if your hair was
inside tips,
say what?
Getting some inside tips.
Oh yeah. And if your hair was curly enough, then it wouldn't look all straight when you blow dried it. You know, you could still have a nice curl to it. So, but frankly, yeah, it was.
So when you joined Monty and that trio, I'm thinking you guys were closer in age and in, I don't know, points in your career, right? So is that a mentor thing, or is that a thing of you guys growing together?
I would say mostly the latter, but you know, I have to give it up to Monty because I had never played reggae and dread reggae, calypso, merengue. We learned about so many Caribbean sounds through Monty Alexander. So that was an important part of our process. But Monty, he's a swinger. You know, he's so influenced by Nat Cole and Oscar Peterson and, you know, Errol Garner and the list that that's basically what we did. But definitely in every show, there was also some of his roots. So he was a mentor. I have to give it up. But, you know, we kind of mentored each other.
Yeah, that's what I would think, that there had to be a give and take between you guys.
Totally. We experimented together. I mean, you know, playing with Jeff Hamilton is totally like old shoes. You know, I don't have to think when I play with him. So if I'm playing with other drummers, I may have to take a couple of bars to really adjust to where they perceive the groove. I don't have to do that with Jeff Hamilton. There are only a couple of other people that I don't have to do that with. I never had to do that with Billy Higgins, and I don't have to do that with Lewis Nash. But, you know, other than that, a couple of other people, but, you know, other than a small handful of people, you kind of had to make some adjustments. But Jeff and I worked on that. You know, we experimented. So we would do things like we would play. I remember we'd be playing and our whole thing was, you listen to me and I'll listen to you. We won't focus on ourselves, right? So while we were playing the first song with Monty Alexander, for instance, I might be like fixing my strings or adjusting my amplifier or whatever. And Jeff would say, "Hey," and I'd look over and he'd be playing the cymbal, you know, and then he would use the other stick and point to his chest as if to say, "Listen to me," you know, and then I'd say, "Oh, okay, yeah." And then the next night, you know, we'd be playing the first song and he's adjusting his snare drum or whatever. And I'd say, "Hey," and, you know, I'd look at him like, so we worked on that stuff. And that really was in terms of mentoring each other.
I want to talk to you more about that, about the communication between musicians, because I love watching that. But first, I have to ask about the Count Basie Orchestra, because if I'm doing my math right, again, going by your bio, you're 25 when you entered Count Basie Orchestra. Now, what is that like? You're 25, okay? At 25, I think I was, you know, learning to drive and hanging out on the corner of Sunset and Crescent. Or so I don't know what I was doing. I was not in the Count Basie Orchestra. Is that mind blowing on some level, or is that like, yeah, this is where I belong? What's that like at that age?
It's, you know what, but at that time I hadn't stumbled on what I call my mantra, which is, I may not be worthy, but I belong here. Right. So I may not be worthy to be with Count Basie, but I belong here because I would do anything to be here.
Yeah.
And I hadn't stumbled on that, but it was mostly about understanding that if you wanted something, you just go for it, go get it. And when I was at Indiana University, one of my dreams was to be able to play with Duke Ellington. He died while I was still in college, and then I go with Monty Alexander. Another one of my dreams was to play with Count Basie. And I was with Monty Alexander for a couple of years, and I just got to thinking, boy, if at all possible. So who did I call? Ray Brown. And I knew that he knew Count Basie, and I told him, you know, do you know if it'd be possible for me to? So the next day I was talking to Count Basie, and he said, "Hey, hello, young man. I hear you'd like to play in my orchestra." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Basie." And he said, "Okay, I'll have my manager call you." So I was talking to the manager. He said, just so happens our bass player is leaving in 2 weeks. Are you available? So I told Monty Alexander. He gave me his blessing. I joined Count Basie's band. And the first day on the bus, because we worked out of New York. So we worked out of the President Hotel was our meeting place on 48th Street. And it was a dive back then, bro. I got to tell you, it was, somebody came up with that term later on, the Roach Hotel. This was the Roach Hotel. And anyway, so I get on the bus. We met in front of the hotel. I get on the bus and I'm early, of course. I got my bass in the back, got my back seat, and I'm ready. And on comes Freddie Green, and the great guitar player. And he said, hey, he didn't talk much. He looked at me and said, hey. I said, oh, Mr. Green, how are you? He sat down right across from me, right? So I'm in the same row as Freddie Green. I'm pinching myself, which is basically the story meaning here. But so I pinched myself the whole time. Count Basie comes on, and he comes to the back of the bus and says, how are you, young blood? And I said, great to meet you, Mr. Basie. I'm excited to be. He said, yeah. So he started talking to Freddie Green. Now, they had a thing going. You probably have noticed this from watching old videos, how these guys would talk in parables. Mm-hmm. A lot of the sentences that they said really didn't quite make sense, but yet they did. And so he and Freddie Green had this thing, it must have been from the 1930s. So he's basically standing in the aisle looking up at the ceiling, and Freddie Green's looking out the window, and they're talking to each other. And I'm watching this. And Count Basie said, hey, yeah, you ever hear from so-and-so? He played saxophone. And Freddie Green said, yeah, I saw him a few months ago. He said, oh, yeah, Basie. Oh, yeah, how'd he sound? Freddie, yeah, he sound okay, playing a lot of notes. And Basie said, yep, dog shit fast, don't shit long. And I went, so that was the beginning of my Basie. I'm like writing this down and getting ready to. So it was kind of that sort of a thing where the experience with that band was constantly a learning experience. I was constantly getting information because my ears were open and I wanted to know. I wanted to learn more and more and more about what the Basie band was doing, what they were about, what they were saying. And a lot of the lessons that they gave me weren't conscious lessons. They were lessons that they would give me by pointing me in the directions of dropping hints. So that was the vibe.
And then you go into playing from his band. You play with other orchestras, big bands, ultimately Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra. And I've seen you lead the big band on the Jazz Cruise, which is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
When you get into that, or when you started doing that, et cetera, how do you listen to all of that music? I mean, you have this many musicians, and each one is doing his thing, and you're running the show, and so I know you're aware of what everybody's doing, what everyone's playing. Did you learn that in the Count Basie Orchestra? Did you learn that along the way? How did you learn to move from musician to band leader / conductor?
Whew. That's a great question. I think it was baptism by fire, because like you were talking about your past, and there are no classes for that. The classes that exist now kind of didn't exist back when I was interested. If they did, I didn't know about it. And it was, okay, let me check out how people are doing this. So I watched how the lead alto player in the band would count in the orchestra and cut off their chord, and how Mr. Basie would start the band. I mean, he had a way of conducting from the piano that was some conducting, and a lot of it was cues. So he stayed out of the band's way. One of the things that the Basie band is famous for is Count Basie setting up the groove before the band horns come in. So he would play an intro or play a chorus of blues or whatever, and then he would play ding dang gang gun do boo do boo bee bon the band, you know, as soon as the band heard do 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 do, they knew they were supposed to come in. So he had a way of musically conducting the band without saying anything. He also had a way of getting the train going, like the groove train, if you will, going before the horns came in. So they didn't have somebody go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, play. Instead, you had the groove going through your body. So when you had to play, all you had to do was jump on this already moving train. So that was his way of doing it. And then I watched a lot of people. I mean, I watched Gerald Wilson. I watched Thad Jones. I watched Duke Ellington videos. I watched so many people conducting and watched what were those common denominators, right? And then playing in the symphony orchestra in Holland for 5 years. We had a lot of different guest conductors come in. So I watched what they did with their hands, facial expressions, all that kind of stuff. And I heard the effect on the orchestra. So I just would take notes, mental notes about all that stuff. And then here I am with my friends standing in front of them. So it kind of it all kind of came together. And you learn to hear things that need your attention. You know, you hear that the energy might not be quite right, and you know that you can help. So you reflect the energy that's necessary, whether it's, you know, if you need more oomph from the band, you got to get more oomph from your body. You're standing in front of them, right? If you're playing something that's really mellow and chill, then you might need to reflect that with your body language. So it's all that stuff.
Okay. Well, now listen, there's questions from people have written in, and I think now is the time to work in one of them from Gerald Veasley. And it relates to you being the conductor or the band leader. Have you ever had stage fright? I mean, you have an orchestra and you're walking out there and you're the man. You're the man, right? So you ever get nervous and say, like, man, all these people are watching me. They're waiting right now.
Yeah. The older you get, the more it's in control, the more it's in check. And it's pretty okay now. But in the back of my mind, if I stand in front of, especially with musicians I don't know, I don't mind embarrassing myself in front of people I know. So that's okay. But if I'm standing in front of a band or an orchestra and I'm on the podium, I'm standing in front and I raise my hands, I swear to you, even with all that I've done, what goes through my mind is this the time that they will discover that I really don't know what the F I'm doing? I swear. And then once we get going, then I feel, okay, we're all right. But so it's not really stage fright, like shaking in my boots, but it's kind of an insecurity that I deal with.
You just made me think of something that I never have to deal with, because when you're leading the orchestra, you have musicians in front of you and the audience behind you. Are you thinking of one more than the other? Does one, like, I never have them in front and behind, John. I only got to battle them in one direction.
In fact, but I'll come to your question if you'll ask mine, because I've always wondered this, man. What's it like being a comedian with a jazz audience? I've always wondered. I've never asked.
Phenomenal. The jazz audience is phenomenal because they are generally people who are they into the creativity, like they get it. They're smart. So whatever you talk about, they tend to know what you're talking about, and they're patient. They respect the art, for lack of a better term. So yeah, I love a jazz audience, and it's also the vibe. You know, even there used to be a comedy club on Victoria Island, you know, going to Vancouver Island in the city of Victoria. And it was a jazz club during the week and a comedy club Friday and Saturday. And when you went there, you could feel the vibe. It had the big velvet couches and just it, and you wouldn't do a high energy show. Your whole show would be, yeah, I'm just chilling. We're just going to talk. It was such a great energy. And on the cruises, you know, on the jazz cruise, again, the creativity of what I get to do, because usually I'll do 2 shows, and one show is going to be my material, and then the other show is just going to be about the cruise and people and experiences of that week. And that's the improv. And the first, early on when I did that, and it was Patty Austin, I never forget it. She yelled while I was improv, and she's like, "That's jazz." And it felt so good, right? I mean, you guys, like, to be, as I tell everyone, when I'm on a cruise with you guys, I'm the fan with the best seat in the house. So whenever I get that from you musicians, that, yeah, that's jazz he's doing, like, that's who better to tell me, like, this is, okay, I'm just surrounded by the greatest jazz musicians in the world. They just said my comedy rates. I'm good.
My least favorite, that's amazing. My least favorite moments in the jazz cruise are when I am booked while you are doing your act.
Thank you.
I want to be there, man. I swear, I'm like, damn, oh man, we got to play while Alonzo's on. Number one, we probably won't have an audience, but I don't care about that. I just want to be there with. So, for me, to be honest, I don't think about the audience. It's really about the music, and I don't choose music thinking about the audience. I don't think about, okay, we should do this one because audiences really like this one. I think artists need to be need to express themselves through music with honesty and clarity. And so the honesty we get. What's the clarity? The clarity is me working on all those details. But then I'm there on stage with all these musicians, and we've chosen the music that we feel good about working on and then sharing with the audience. So it's not like I've just poo-poo the audience. Of course, it's like we figure out this amazing meal that we work on together, that we express ourselves through. And then we present this meal to the audience. We don't just think, oh, y'all are there. Okay, here's some stuff. There's a 24-hour sauce that my grandmother taught me. Yeah, go ahead, eat this. It's not like that at all. We have worked on this diligently and are serious about it and are having fun with it, are expressing ourselves through this. Now, may we offer this to you is how I think of it. So, it's, again, if the audience, let's say an audience member says, hey, can you do this song? We'd like to request this song. Now, if I will think about it. I'll go, yeah, I'm feeling that. Sure. I'd be happy to do that, But if they request a song that I'm not feeling, then I won't add it, because then I'm having to play a song that doesn't have the level of honesty attached to it that I need to have, So
now I want to, and because I keep looking at the clock, because I want to get this done. I want to talk to you about jazz as the family business and a couple of other things you've done. But first, just audience, he's talking about he doesn't think about the audience. Can we see the purple suit? And I want you to tell me you didn't think about the audience when you put on this badass suit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, look at that man and tell me he wasn't thinking about the audience when he picked that out.
Well, my tailor would love hearing you say that. There's a guy named Woody Wilson here in Los Angeles, he's a wonderful tailor. But yeah, okay, yeah, I was thinking about, but I had to be honest that I wanted those colors for me too. So yeah, it's okay. Honesty and clarity.
So getting back to the mentoring, and I mean, jazz is the family business. Jazz is the Clayton family business. How did that work? Did one lead to another? Did you come into it together? Obviously your son Gerald, and I mean, when you talk about mentoring, that is the ultimate mentoring, because your son is a brilliant musician in his own right. But with the family, how did it all come together? My brother, was there a leader, or was it everyone, or how did it work?
No, my brother Jeff and I are the only two musicians in the family. So again, my mom has a great sense of humor. She's still with us, thank God. But she, not only did she have 7 kids, she named us all beginning with the first letter J. So it's Johnny, Jeffrey, Janine, Joseph, Jerome, Jennifer, Joy. So at my house, it was always my mother going, "Judge, boy, put that down." You know, it was that kind of a thing. But so Jeff and I were the only ones, even though my mom played piano and conducted the church choirs and everything. So we did hear music at home. Jeff and I are the only ones that really pursued it. And my mom allowed me to play bass in church, but she wouldn't allow my brother in the beginning to play that heathen saxophone in God's house. So that was not allowed. Eventually she changed her tune. It was okay, but in the beginning. But Jeff and I were the only ones that really played, and we didn't start out with the Clayton brothers. You know, I was doing my little junior high and high school thing, and he was likewise. Every now and then we'd play a tune together or something like that, but it was not like we got together regularly. It wasn't until college, frankly, that I would come home on breaks from Indiana that we started kind of really playing more tunes together or doing more gigs together. And then eventually when I joined Monty, when I joined Count Basie's band, we actually seriously would in the breaks work on things and kind of created the Clayton Brothers group. So that's how that the first recording we made as the Clayton Brothers happened while I was playing in Count Basie's band. So that's kind of how it started, really. And then when I finally moved back to the US from my years in Holland, we decided to make a go of it, 100% of the time.
Now, and again, it's so sorry, I got to jump ahead. And to the powers that be, yeah, we're going to run a little over. I don't care about my next interview. They can wait because I have to ask you about a few things. Now, you were the arranger when Whitney Houston sang the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
That is probably considered the greatest rendition ever of the Star Spangled Banner, right? By I don't know if by everyone, but most people. What was that like? Did she sing it and then you put it together? Did you what was it like collaborating on that? And how does it feel now knowing that you're part of that? That is the gold standard for the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah, thank you. Now, actually it started with, it started with our kind of laying it down, and then Whitney put her thing on top of that. So even though there was an in-person orchestra on the field, the Florida Symphony Orchestra, we had pre-recorded the track. So Ricky Minor, the great bass player who was her music director at the time. Ricky called me and said, "Hey, we're doing this thing, and we'd like to have you do your thing with the Star Spangled Banner. It's for a symphony orchestra, and you can do your thing. The only two things that we request is, number one, if you can kind of set up some sort of a groove within the orchestra before we start, and the other thing is to put it in 4/4 instead of in 3/4. So normally it's, oh, say, can you see, da 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 da, 1 2 3 da da, right? But he wanted, which is what Marvin Gaye did, by the way. He wanted it in 4/4. Oh, say, can you see, 2 3 4, down 2 3 4. So that was the change. So other than that, they gave me free rein. So I ended up kind of mixing up my little classical influence with my bebop stuff. So there were more kind of jazzy chords going on, and I being an arranger and understanding the whole mood thing and attaching yourself to the moods of a piece. Long story short, I just kind of went with all of those things. And you may recall the Gulf War was going on at the time, so the nation was really in a very nationalistic kind of frame of mind, and so all of the stars aligned. And when Whitney sang it, it just all came together, and I was so honored to be a part of that. Still am honored to have had something to do with that. So yeah, I mean, it's like, so that thing did help my career. I mean, I don't know what, for instance, what did Wait, Don't Tell Me do for your career, for instance?
Yeah, that introduced me to the NPR audience, which is great. and I love my NPR nerds. They're funny, they're smart, they love it. I'm going to ask you about another person because we have someone in common, my friend, that you may not know, Queen Latifah.
Stop.
Yes,
I love her.
My first role in a movie, and I say that as if I've had a bunch of them, but Bringing Down the House, which was her and Steve Martin. So I got to work with her, and she was fantastic. Now you won a Grammy with her. So did you have to teach her anything about jazz? That was her doing jazz. Did you teach her? Did she know? What was that like?
She was already ready. She knew. She is. I don't know if it's. I imagine it's the same in terms of your experience with her, but she totally blew my mind. All of us. Jeff Hamilton was on drums, and next thing I know, he was giving her a brushes lesson. She picked up on how to play with the brushes, and they were talking drum stuff. I go, who is this woman? And because she not only could she sing the arrangements that I had written, but she fit right in with the jazz style. She knew how to phrase that way. She knew how to. I mean, you know about her whole hip hop background.
Yeah, I mean that was the big thing. My thing with her, I'll tell you really quick. My Queen Latifah story was, we're on set, and she looked at me. She said, "Wow, you look familiar. Do I know you?" And I said, "Well, no, but maybe you saw me do stand up somewhere or something." She said, "Oh, that's cool." And I said to her, "Didn't you make a record? Didn't you like sing a song or something?" And she just fell out laughing, because this is Queen Latifah, right? Queen of hip hop. And for the next 2 days of filming, every time I saw her, I was like, "What was the name of that record? You sing, right?" And she was fantastic. She couldn't have been nicer, more fun and funny funny. She was great.
Down to earth. I mean, I really adore her, and I thank her for allowing me to win a Grammy. That was cool too. And if it hadn't been for Queen Latifah, I wouldn't have won that Grammy. I mean, you know how these awards things go.
Yeah.
You drop that name. I mean, I was so honored to be nominated, but people behind the scenes don't know who I am, and that's just fine. But when they saw her name, the votes came in, and I'm honored to have the Grammy. But the nomination thing and the experience with Queen Latifah really was over the top wonderful.
Now I'm going to name another artist, Diana Krall, who, we've heard of her. She's done all right. But when you got her, she's just singing and playing the piano. Was it like on the bar level, on the club level? What was that relationship like? And are you now like, yeah, look at my girl, look, she made it? Is there some of that going on because you were a big influence with her?
We're still close friends. I love her to death. She was 19 years old when she moved from Canada down here to study with Jeff Hamilton, Alan Broadbent, Jimmy Rolls, and myself. She was focusing at that time on learning how to play trio piano. So I didn't really even know that she sang. And she called me a couple times and asked me if I could do a gig at the Holiday Inn, lobby or something like that. And I would accommodate her. And in exchange, she ended up, she babysat my kids. So which we laugh about. She was 19 years old, and my son always rolls his eyes whenever she tells people, "I used to babysit him." Don't you remember Gerald? He had a little monkey. See the monkey, Diana? See the monkey? See the monkey? She just you hate that kind of stuff. But yeah, so she really got into trio piano playing, learned how to do that with us, and then she opened her mouth, and kind of the rest is history. And I'm happy that she went from student to employer. So she called Jeff Hamilton and myself and some other people and kept us on board. And we're still very, very good friends and very good. In fact, she has an album that we did to come together coming out really soon, I think in the next month or so. So that's fun.
And what is it like with Gerald, with your son, watching him become who he is? Again, I said it earlier, but is that the ultimate mentor thing to, your son's taking over or not taking over, I should say, carrying on the family business?
Yeah, I mean, how could that not feel good, right? But what really feels good is I remember, because my wife and I, we never pushed Gerald, never pushed our kids. He's got an older sister, Gina. We never pushed our kids. We supported them and encouraged them. But, I didn't say, okay, you need to get into music. You need to take piano lessons. That was his choice. And of course, like I said, I supported that. He started taking classical lessons. We kind of insisted on that. And at some point he got into what Papa was doing. And that was gratifying as well. Again, I didn't push it. I supported it. And I tried to be hands off. Unless I heard some stuff that I really, because I might be cooking dinner in the kitchen and he's practicing, and I go, "That's an F sharp in the melody in the third bar." I might kind of do that every now. But other than that, I was hands off. And at some point, I said to him, I got this gig with the Clayton brothers, and Bill Cunliffe, our piano player, can't make it. Are you interested? And he said, "Oh yeah, right, that would be fun." So then at some point, I said, Bill Cunliffe left the band, and I just wondered, is this, because I didn't want to push
him
into this. I said, is this something you'd be interested in? He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "It's been my dream to play with the Clayton brothers." So you can imagine how that made me feel, because I had no idea that he felt that way, that was one of the things that he really wanted to do. So that was a big, and then of course, the whole time he's with our group, part of me is also thinking, you know what? Yeah, you need to also be doing your own thing.
Yeah.
I so love having Gerald, because it's like you said, it's a familial thing. There's a lot of stuff that goes on stage that you don't have to think about. Like, I don't have to think about what to tell the piano player in terms of accompanying me, or what he knows. And, he knows when I play something that it comes from this source. The audience may not hear that, but he does. It's like that. It's pretty cool. And people always say, "I can always see how proud you are of your son." And I always have to tell them, well, actually, when we're playing together, I don't realize that he's anything other than a piano player, because we're all focused on the music, right?
That's great.
It's only afterwards I kind of go, "Wow, oh yeah, that's my kid."
Well, it did, kind of eliminate you having to give him money. He's now earning it, so that was good. He's
Preach.
Now I'm going to give you another Gerald Beasley question, and I know we got to wrap up in a few, but I just love this question, because he said, if the Clayton family hadn't been musical, what might the family business be?
Boy, is that a good question. Well, to be honest, and I don't know if this would have been the family business, but I love cooking. And I was going to be a chef before I was going to be a bass player. So I always did the cooking at home whenever my mom could. Like, my mom, she was a postal carrier, a mail carrier, and worked for the post office. So she was, while we were at school, she was at work, and I'd get home before she would. And it started out with her, little note that would say, "Johnny, there's a chicken in the refrigerator with seasoning on it. Put it in the oven at 350 or whatever." Then it kind of morphed into season the chicken, blah, blah, blah. Then it morphed into fix dinner. So I loved doing that. And I became kind of interested in cooking, and I still am. I do all the cooking, most of the cooking at home. So it probably would have had something to do with food.
All right, great. John, I hate to do this, but I have to go. I wish we could go on forever. We're going to see each other in Vegas. Are you looking forward to that? That's going to be February 21st to 26th. So we're going to do the cruise, but we're going to do it on land in Vegas.
Yes. I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to connecting with real people. By that time, a lot of my angst will have, had a reason to subside, and I'll be ready. Mask on, I'll be there.
To our listeners, to people watching, go to the jazzcruise.com/Vegas. Look at the packages available. Join us in Las Vegas. It's going to be fantastic. And maybe, if we're lucky, John will either bring the purple suit, or there could be a new color by then. He's got time to work. We don't know what we might see in front of the big band. I'm Alonzo Bodden. You can find me at alonzobodden.com. I'm doing a little bit of live work. I'm doing a lot of Zooms. I love and appreciate the support. John, where can they find you?
I'm at johnclaytonjazz.com.
johnclaytonjazz.com. John, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, so many questions I wish I could have asked, but I love the arc of your career. I love how you took what you learned and you share it with so many, and you even do lessons online, which is, some people, if you play the bass, look into it. I'm gonna let that go because yeah, we established a while ago, music ain't my thing, but I love how you guys do it. John, I love you, man. Thank you.
Love you too, bro. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching this episode of Jazz Cruise Conversations Live with John and Alonzo. You can hear this conversation and over 50 more with the Jazz Cruise Conversations podcast, available at iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, tune in for a conversation with John Pizzarelli and Ken Poplowski about the legacy of guitarist Bucky Pizzarelli. We're moving the start time to 8:30 p.m. East Coast time to avoid overlap with the master classes presented by our friends Christian McBride and Jazz House Kids. So see you next week at 8:30 Eastern.